Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com, dwyervip.com. Today is June the 5th, 2017. Remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. The point of this video is to say that I'm going to stay on the sidelines with regard to this Mikey Garcia, Adrien Broner fight. Right? The storm clouds are out, in my opinion. Let's give a little historical context. I've done all right betting against fighters who are excellent fighters, who at the end of great careers, right? You heard me right, the end of great careers, decide, you know what, I'm going to swing for the fences. What do I have to lose? Let me try to be even greater than I am. So, a couple of generations ago, you had one of the best fighters I've ever seen. Michael Spinks, right? Unbeaten light heavyweight champion. Not cruiser. Light heavy. Right? Think Andre Ward. You had him throwing caution to the wind at the end of his career and deciding, you know what, of all the guys out there in the sport, why don't I fight unbeaten Larry Holmes? People need to realize Larry Holmes was where Floyd Mayweather was. Larry was about to, you know, have his unbeaten streak get past Rocky Marciano. Well, that's my phone. We'll let it ring for a little bit. Well, to make a long story short, Michael Spinks was so dominant that Michael Spinks beat Larry Holmes. Now, to the old-timers here online, I know there are a lot of you, perhaps more than 50%, who believe that Larry Holmes won that fight. And there's a feeling among many that there was a bit of a conspiracy against Larry Holmes because people didn't want to see him take down Rocky Marciano. Right? Okay, fine. But let's agree that the light heavyweight champion that night exceeded expectations by a wide margin. Just imagine an unbeaten champion fighting Andre Ward, and Andre Ward being in the fight, late, still on his feet, right? You know, winning rounds. Well, Michael Spinks then, right, continued with it. He fought Larry Holmes in a rematch, beats Larry Holmes in the rematch, right? People forget that he then fights Gerry Cooney. Think about that, right? Knocks out Gerry Cooney. He then fights, he mixes in Stephen Tankstead somewhere in there, but he then fights Mike Tyson. That's when you get the famous first round KO. But understand, that's at the end of a Hall of Fame career for Michael Spinks. Right? Dominant light heavyweight champion. He beat people like Eddie Mustafa Muhammad. If you're at the Mayweather gym and you're interviewing people, talk to Eddie about Michael Spinks. Right? Michael Spinks also beat Dwight Cowie. Right? Mustafa Muhammad and Dwight Cowie were very good fighters back in the day. Of course, Spinks then gains a bunch of weight, beats Larry Holmes twice, knocks out Gerry Cooney. Think about it. Right? He's not even tiptoeing in the heavyweight division. He knocks out Gerry Cooney. So then he fights Mike Tyson and he loses. You could tell the guy just decided at the end of his career, let me throw caution to the wind. Let me take fights that are the most outrageous possible fights I could take. Right? The heavyweight champion, the unbeaten heavyweight champion of several years, let me take him on. Right? You have Joe Calzaghe, unbeaten in his career. At the end of his career, he decides, you know what? Let me go fight Bernard Hopkins in the United States. Then he follows that up by fighting Roy Jones in the United States. Right? Calzaghe financially didn't need these fights. Right? But Calzaghe, at the end of his career, understood that he didn't want to be the guy 10 years later who regretted not fighting two of his best contemporaries. Well, now we get to Mikey Garcia. Now, in an earlier video here, I pointed out that Mikey Garcia didn't even want to be a boxer. He wanted to be a police officer. He just happens to be in a boxing family. Right? And so, you know, dad's a trainer. Big brother's a world champion. You know how it goes, right? Little kids in the ring with some gloves, and suddenly the people around him understand, wow, Mikey has a lot of talent here. Right? Mikey, I believe, was in the police academy or something. Right? This isn't a guy who thought about being a cop. This is a guy who was actively taking steps to be a cop. So he becomes a professional fighter, wins the featherweight title, wins the super featherweight title, wins the lightweight title. Folks, he is a 3-division champion. He's also unbeaten. Now, if you're a guy who, in your heart, knows that boxing wasn't a passion of yours, right? You're not the little kid who wakes up and says, someday I'm going to be lightweight champion of the world. You're not that guy. You're the guy who's thinking about, hey, you know, I just want a steady job, be able to afford a mortgage, raise a family, you know, be a provider, right? You're that guy. And then you happen to have the Hall of Fame career, right, where you're picking up titles in different divisions. At some point, I believe, you reached the point where Michael Spinks reached, where Joe Calzaghe reached. I believe Mikey has looked at the exit and is thinking to himself, you know what? Let me just see how far I can take this. Right? So, let me just say this. Mikey, in his entire professional career, has only had one fight above 135 pounds. Folks, he barely fought at 135 pounds. This is a guy who picked up the lightweight belt in about 5 minutes. Right? So now Mikey is gaining weight to take on a defensive wizard. Right? Adrien Broner only has 2 losses, none of them at 140 pounds. Right? He lost to Marcus Maidana at 147. He lost to Sean Porter, and y'all know I consider Sean Porter to be one of the more underrated fighters in the sport. He lost to Porter at 147. Right? So now we have him being challenged by a great fighter who has very little experience at 140 pounds. Now let me just say, this is the kind of fight where I'd be drooling on my way to place a bet on Adrien Broner. Right? I think the world of Mikey Garcia, but weights matter in boxing. Right? There's something called too much too soon. Broner to me is a problematical matchup. He really is defensively blessed. Right? Here's why I can't bet on the fight. Go through the Broner resume. You're going to see too many fights at 147. Now, I know, Broner's 27, right? 5 people now are going to say, Dwyer, he's actually 26 or something. Okay, fine. Go ahead, double check me. It's all good. But Broner is about 27. And Broner fought Paulie Malignaggi in 2013 at 147. Right? His last fight, Adrien Granados, that was at 147 pounds. You know, I'm a skeptic of guys who have choices and use them to fight outside of their division. Right? In my opinion, Broner is fighting at 147 by choice because he is a welterweight. He's not a junior welterweight. He is a welterweight. Some promoter has whispered in his ear and said, player, forget dessert. Forget how hungry you are. Right? You belong at 140. I think that's a mistake. I think these fighters who are draining themselves to go down a weight class are making a big mistake. Right? So, to me, Broner has been fighting at 147 for too many years for me to believe that he can comfortably make 140. Even the Ashley Theophane fight. Here's a shock. After a training camp, Adrien Broner shows up and couldn't make weight. Now, I know the casual fans, they'll say, come on, the brother was within half a pound of making weight for that fight. That's the fight 2 fights ago. But you and I know the hardest pound to lose is that last half a pound. Right? Do you think Broner had had a glass of water in the 10 hours before he stepped on the scale? I'm telling you, a lot of these guys show up at weigh-ins so dehydrated, I personally wonder how the guy is able to give an interview after he steps off the scale. So Broner, I'm sure, did everything he could to weigh 140 against Ashley Theophane, who's not the biggest puncher in the world. Right? It's not like Broner needed the extra weight because he was wondering if he could take the guy's punch. No, he's fighting a guy who's not that hard a puncher. And Broner could not lose that last half pound. So if this fight were at 147, I'd be on Adrien Broner. If this fight were at 143.5, I'd be on Adrien Broner. This fight's at 140. Right? It's at 140 against a guy who I consider to be a future Hall of Famer. The other thing, too, with Mikey Garcia is if you research his record, you're going to see that he stops a lot of guys early. They can't quite figure out the angles. Looking at his films, he looks like an orthodox fighter to me. But he's hitting too many guys flush early in fights for that to be a coincidence. Right? So, I'm nervous about this fight. I think there's a weight dynamic here, even though Broner's in his 20s, not his 30s like Cal Brook, right? I think there's a weight dynamic here that bothers me. But I also wonder, is Mikey Garcia ready for 140 pounds? Guys, he was barely at 135 pounds. Right? Keep in mind, too, moving to a new weight class, the issue isn't just whether your punch carries. Right? The issue is also whether you can take the punch of these heavier opponents. And make no mistake, I know Broner, has had some problems. But Broner can punch. There's no question about that. Right? And Broner can play defense. So I get the feeling Mikey Garcia has never fought a guy with this level of defense. Add it all up, and to me, this is a great fight. It is a must-watch fight. Right? Really is. Especially since Mikey Garcia is unbeaten. And, like Michael Spinks, is fighting outside of his division against a credible opponent. This is a great fight. but it's too dangerous a fight for this gambler, right? If I thought Adrien Broner, would have no problem making 140, and if Adrien Broner had a track record of regularly making 140 without the issues that he had against Ashley Theophane, and if Adrien Broner hadn't been fighting at 147 dating back to 2013, I'd be on Adrien Broner. But I can't, because this fight might well be a guy moving up in weight against a guy who's dehydrated. Right? I don't know what to expect. I'm on the sidelines from a gambling perspective. I can say to casual boxing fans, this is one of the must-watch fights of the year. That's how I see it. Let me hear from you if you have an opinion on this fight. If you feel one of these guys has a clear edge, go ahead and leave those thoughts with a discussion of the odds if you want, right? And the books offering those odds in the comment section to this video. Thanks for stopping by.